welcome to the Spoiler Alert podcast with your hosts Nate Krenz and Dakota Scott. This is our first podcast, so it's going to be pretty fast and loose today. Just a brief overview of what we're doing here is we're going to give you long form discussion based reviews on movies and film, which is the exact same thing, and it's built into the name. There are spoilers. We will be talking about the endings of these movies. We'll try to keep it so that we're not doing newer movies, so that we don't spoil anything that's like within the realm of people being mad at. Like, so if it's older than 5 years old, I figure it's fair game. And if a fourth of the way or so through these videos and through these podcasts, you feel like you would just rather watch the movie and you're sold on it, we would encourage you to hit the like button and fast forward the rest of the way through, just so we might get a view out of it, because we did like let you know about this movie or these movies.
You only have to make it a certain number of minutes into it for it to count as a view. So just like maintain your attention for like, I want to say 5 minutes, and then it counts as a view, and then fuck off. So
right. We welcome,
because otherwise the analytics are going to be misleading. Like it'll look like people are actually sitting through it, and then like if they're dropping off after 2 minutes, we won't know that. We'll be like, oh, we're doing really good because everybody looks, they're watching to the end.
And if you go through a fourth of the way or so, or halfway, and you decide, hey, I want to watch this movie, I want to stop listening to these guys, and you watch the movie, feel free to come back, finish up the video, like, reflect on what you thought of the movie. Or if
I don't want any fucking quitters coming back. Fuck that, I mean, no, you sleep in the bed you made, okay? You don't get none of this now.
Chaos reigns. So speaking of chaos reigning, our first movie to go through in the Spoiler Alert podcast is Lars von Trier's Breaking the Waves. It was released in 1996. It's starring Stellan Skarsgård and Emily Watson. And just to give you a brief little sampler, a little overview of what you can expect in a Lars von Trier film, I'm going to hand it over to Dakota to kind of wet your whistle, and then we're going to get into it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a fitting one to start off on, because, we're probably going to be doing fucked up movies on a regular basis, right? So
semi-regular. I mean, we have like not such a fucked up one planned next, but we're gonna be like, it's gonna be like fucked up, kind of likable, fucked up mainstream, fucked up, like well, we'll roll with it. I think
since this is our first episode, then at the very least we're gonna alienate everybody who wouldn't stick around otherwise. So at least
I don't think you can go from 0 to more 0. So like there will be no alienation. Like it's just you can't multiply by 0. So all right, let's talk some about Lars von Trier. I've watched a fair amount of his movies. I've watched for instance Melancholia, Antichrist, Nymphomaniac, and then Breaking the Waves. I believe I'm missing at least 3 or 4, and you may have seen those.
Oh no, I'm a huge fan, and I haven't seen a number of his movies. So like Zentropa's on HBO Max, and I wanted to watch that, but I thought it might interfere with, like, I might start thinking more about the most recent movie I've watched, and I thought that'd mess it up. So what'd you think of Melancholia and Antichrist and Nymphomaniac? Because that's kind of considered a trilogy, and by him, I think all of his movies are kind of similar and share a lot of themes across.
They are definitely similar, and Spielberg once talked about Kubrick's work, and there are some themes that you see that are similar between Kubrick and like at least filming styles that you see that are similar between Kubrick and Lars von Trier, where they take one theme, like one basic, like strong theme, and just like he used the term broad strokes. Like he'll just attack like one theme, where like in Melancholia, it's depression, there's just very large themes throughout written into it. Similar things with Antichrist, because like in that one, a lot of it's shame, right? A lot of it's shame and depression. And
Yeah, Doc, I haven't, it's absolutely one of my favorite movies of all time. I'm like trying to think back on it. So it's not me disagreeing. I'm just like, I'm trying to think if
okay, this is also important.
I would say guilt.
Yes,
rather than
guilt.
shame.
Yeah, probably more guilt than shame. Yeah, you're right. I'm off there. And then basically Nymphomaniac is sex.
But
yeah, go ahead.
I thought it was a beautiful love story, between Shia LaBeouf. Well, no, I'm trying to think. Yeah, Nymphomaniac is the one. I know he considers it part of his depression trilogy, Antichrist and Melancholia, but it's the one that kind of feels like the odd one out in a lot of ways. But the one constant across those three movies, and then I'd say this is with Antichrist, the thing I tend to think of, and in Melancholia as well. And then Nymphomaniac's a little harder to pin down. Like he's just railing against everything with that. I feel like, but is the idea that like the earth is evil. And so you obviously the chaos reigns thing in Antichrist, and then Kristen Dunst's character. So a line that sticks out to me from Melancholia is that the earth is evil. We don't need to grieve for it. Nobody's going to miss it. And I would actually there was something because I feel like I cracked the movie breaking this one, but I don't want to. I don't want to kind of give it away because I think it's important to factor in what you think about the movie as you go for the first time, because I got actually kind of impatient with it for probably the first like 45 minutes. And I think that's important to consider. I mean, you can ultimately say that like, oh, it all pays off and makes sense if you stick with it. But I think it's important to like kind of remember your first viewing experience. So did you take it as kind of a straightforward narrative, or did you kind of see there being a suggestion of sort of a meta statement, or because if not, I mean, that's totally valuable. I think I got impatient because I thought it was like really straightforward, and then I started looking at it through the lens of like Lars von Trier, and I think it works on both levels. I don't think like the meta statement is the only thing that like, and then in The House That Jack Built, which is his most recent film, that's a very big thing. So like, but I see that as kind of going as far back as this picture. So I think that's one of two keys I can kind of give you as far as looking at the film.
So the movie starts. It basically opens up on a wedding day, essentially.
Like kind of like Melancholia.
Right. That's kind of a pattern between Lars von Trier's films. It begins with a wedding in Scotland, which is my background right now. It's my lovely background that's got a little bit of falling apart right now.
Is that an image from the picture itself? Because it looks like painterly, like the way he does that. Oh, it is? Okay.
Oh, okay. Yep. I am finding different holes in my green screen, and I am just filling them as we speak.
It's really cool, though, because it didn't, like, break the illusion. It just looks like you're distorting reality. Like,
it's like a Looney Tunes thing.
Oh, shit! Yeah. Exactly.
Breaking the Waves begins with a wedding scene in Scotland. The two betrothed are Bess, who's the bride, played by Emily Watson, and Jan. Jan, who's played by Stellan Skarsgård, who you've seen, and who if you haven't seen a ton of movies, you've still probably seen him in things like The Avengers and Good Will Hunting.
Arthur.
Yep. I like how you go to King Arthur before Good Will Hunting. He was pretty good.
Yeah. It's such as chaos reigns. There you go.
Chaos reigns. And it seems innocent enough. It seems fun, but early themes that we see throughout are like just little hints. Like this is where we get our first dose of religion in this film too, because we see like the very strict basically church population, which included like an old man with a beard that had like a little bit of a drinking competition with a guy, and I think he just poured lemonade. One of the friends and we would learn later co-workers of Jan's character is chugging down a Guinness or a Guinness like beer.
Like in a can.
Yeah. A
Tall enough to be Guinness.
large can, chugs it down, crushes it, and then you see this old like church going guy. I think he just poured lemonade because he's pretty like fundamentalist religious. And but thing is, at the end, water, he pours it in a glass, and just to like one up the other guy, he crushes the glass in his own hand and picks the pieces out of his hand, which is pretty striking.
I actually saw it as kind of comedic, but like then when you actually think about like if this played out in real life, like this sheer commitment to, like you said, one-upmanship, they're so prideful that they're literally willing to draw blood to one up the outsiders, you know.
Like it seemed like a scene that could have been just improv too on the day, but it like does work with the story though, because the guy just chugging a beer is just kind of the sympathetic, like
laid back,
fun liking guy, and then the other guy is just like, we'll see later on, a pretty strict, damning type person. And I just realized that the shoulders of my shirt kind of lead right into the mountains, and I'm okay with it. It looks like my head is like popping out of a volcano. I'm not sure if we're going to be on SoundCloud or what we're going to do with just the pure audio, but if you're not seeing this, you're really missing out. I encourage you to go check out the YouTube channel.
You obviously put way more effort into it than I did. I assembled my cube wall. That took me 3 hours on and off. So
hey, man, cubes are hard to find. We get introduced to other characters such as the bride's sister, who you can immediately tell is very protective.
I watched it like 3 times because I was.
You did? Damn.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yep.
It's okay.
Just the sex scenes, but you know, I figured I wasn't missing much else.
Speaking of sex scenes, that's where we see also the first like sexual experience for Bess and the groom, and it's kind of interesting because like the first one was like rushed and like it wasn't meaningless, but it didn't feel as meaningful as the succeeding ones. They were just kind of like in a bathroom, and they're like, "Let's fucking go."
Yeah, which was her suggestion. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And no. I think the thing that I take away from that scene is, just I think if there's any point, it kind of establishes the matter of factness with which he's like, oh, you got blood on your dress, you know, which for one thing establishes what you probably already suspect is that, you know, she was a virgin. And then, but then that, I mean, obviously he's a bit more experienced. So
I don't know that it's an actual age difference, but the thing that
but it feels like there's one, because like, clearly he's more experienced and
Well, part of it is that the thing that we do learn about them, like as we go, is we do begin to realize that Bess has some kind of mental health issue, you know, whether like developmental or however it was, because she did spend time in like, I believe they called it like the funny farm type deal, like that kind of thing. So there is the
I didn't pick up on that.
Oh yeah, no, she's.
No, you're right. Yeah, she was institutionalized at least.
Yeah, she was institutionalized. So like that's the moral quandary there, where it's like that, and like that's where the character who I thought was the sister, but could just be like a very close friend, was always like so
sisterly
protective
in
of
nature.
her. And like later
Right.
on in the movie, that character tells Jan, like, you like, she's very suggestible, like you can make her do anything you wanted to, kind of like a child, like both innocence and intelligence. So
Intelligence that, well, so I mean, we're, like a childlike kind of intuition, or
no,
like, I mean,
literally like a childlike intelligence is like
that,
like
yeah,
she's
because
not
that's
very
what I feel
bright.
like. I don't know if she has any great. I just feel like she's very childlike, and I don't know if you felt this way, but like when you're watching it for the first time, it's like you're kind of trying to gauge. Well, both the main characters are trying to gauge Jan, who's I think a lot harder to pin down even by the end of the picture, and her. It's like there's something kind of off. She has this devious, wide-eyed, childlike kind of uh uh
Awe, but kind
you
of
know
awe towards life is one thing too.
right, and I'm trying to figure it out, like early on, like what it was, and then obviously as the picture goes on, you kind of go, oh, she's just literally very childish because she's lived in this very isolated environment, and she hasn't had a lot of life experience, so but at first I wasn't sure, because it's like, I mean, there's that uh, well, yeah, I don't know, that wide-eyed something that you're trying to pin down early on
Yeah,
in the picture. So,
and
uh,
like one of the things too is like she really only has like two main pillars in her life. And one thing is her religion, and the other thing is her marriage and her, and like, and then like the third pillar, which is significant but smaller, would be the relationship with her mother and with, yeah. So the relationship with her
well,
sister is a significant pillar. You can just kind of tell that like she was very protective, like from the jump, and probably experienced growing up
in the
with
outside world, yeah.
growing up with like in uh intellectually challenged person, going through what kind of like everything, like she's experienced everything in her own way, has experienced everything that Bess has gone through to that point in her life, because she's always kind of been there. You can
Right, as
kind of
goes,
tell that. And uh
yeah,
and you can tell like she's just also such a nurturing person too, because just of her profession, she's literally a nurse.
that's it.
That comes into play later on.
No, yeah, I did. I like personally, I didn't even think about what her profession really said about her, but yeah, that seems overt now.
She becomes more and more infatuated with Jan, but we learn that Jan has to go back to work on an oil rig offshore in Scotland, and she does not take that well. She has an extreme level of emotional distress, which could be tied in with her illness, to the point where she's crying like a child when he's hopping on the helicopter, like a very like childlike, like like when you're like when a kid's like 4 years old and the mom has to go to work and it's just crying their eyes out. Like that's what those scenes felt like. So she was that attached to Jan.
Yeah, well, the one thing I noticed, I don't know what to make of it, and there's going to be a lot of that as it goes on to that. I don't know if that's recorded or not, but he's talking about kind of that third tier that's really undefined for me. That I don't even know if it exists. I could just be like, but it's when she's smashing the bar off the and the bells ringing at the end of the picture. Not to spoil too much,
Oh,
but I yeah. So
I didn't
I
catch that.
actually, like, literally, I have nothing more to say about that than there's like symmetry there. I don't know what to
I
make of it.
I like that symmetry. We'll go into more detail on that when it makes sense, because
Okay,
like I forgot if I mentioned this earlier, but one of the things that was pointed out at the wedding by the fun liking guy that chugged the beer
right.
was that like where are the bells? Like, there are no bells in this church. Like,
Okay.
there's just a wedding. Why
And
aren't?
again, they're so prideful that they're like, we don't need bells. We don't need bells
Yeah,
to message God, you know,
they are aggressively
prideful.
fundamentalist, and
Right.
and
Well, as is illustrated, obviously, by literally shedding blood just to one up the dude who's like, well, you can crush a can, you can't crush a glass. And he's like, fuck you.
yeah, like one of the more endearing scenes that you do see is what you just mentioned. She's kind of having a panic attack, and Bess, like, she takes a large pipe and just wailing on one of the oil rigs, as though, like, if she could, like, damage it somehow, that like that Jan wouldn't have to leave her, because these oil rig trips do go for months and months and months. So,
Right.
like, and most of the time it's almost like a soldier tour, where like you'll come home every now and then if you're injured. And one of the more endearing things about it is that Jan goes up there to calm her down, and
And he
it
starts
very
doing it himself.
yep, and then he does it himself. And
Okay, so here's something that only literally just occurred to me. I'm like really desperately trying to remember my notes, but I never really made note of. Is You remember all the workers looking down on her, like when she's doing that, like what the fuck, you
yep,
know? But I suppose she could see that, like angels looking down on,
true.
you
Yeah,
know, this big spectacle she's making.
I mean, I'm sure that's a
You
thing
know,
that ran through Lars von Trier's mind. at
yeah,
least a
I'd
little
like
bit,
to think so.
whether it was
Otherwise, I'm just
intentional
like
or not.
schizophrenic. I'm like, it all has meaning. It all matters. You know, but
And since it's a Lars von Trier film, if you're unacquainted, I believe, do they all have chapters, or do they, like, mostly all have chapters?
well, like I said, the same as you. I haven't seen every picture he's made, but certainly Antichrist does. I'm trying to think if
Melancholia does.
Melancholy and Nymphomaniac
Melancholia does. I watched that
does.
recently, and Nymphomaniac is too long of a movie to not have chapters.
Yes, Jesus Christ, that's like fucking what, 6 to 8 hours. And when you talk the director's cut,
Yeah, I mean, just the normal one's like four and a half
yeah,
almost, I think. So yeah, chapter 1 was Bess Gets Married, and then Life with
I,
Jan is chapter 2, and that's kind of more the sex. And then Life Alone begins with him going over to the well, and or to the oil rig.
right.
And you can tell early that, like, just because we don't really see Jan behave without Bess until he's on that oil rig, and you can tell he's a well-respected, like coworker and just man. And they don't have much of it, but like when they do have, like, the positive kind of dimensions of oil rig life, like, I do think that was well done. And
Yeah, like
of like
getting chased around by Mandic, like in the locker rooms during
yeah, I mean,
shit. Yeah,
that's companionship, man.
it
That's
is.
like
That's a
and
side of respect, you know.
cow
Yeah.
whipping
So,
and sharing cigarettes or whatever it
mhm.
was. You know, just guys being dudes, man. Us, on the other hand, is not taking the separation with Yond well. You can tell that she does have attachment issues. She's spending more and more time at church praying. And by the way, when she prays, it's like she talks to herself, which is important to know. Like, she talks to herself when she prays. So she's praying, like, for, like, Jan to be safe, blah 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 blah. And then, like, she'll literally answer in God's voice with, like, whatever answer she has, or whatever answers in store for her at that time. And then go ahead with whatever you're gonna say.
Well, no, I'd be curious to hear what you have to think about all that.
It sets the table for whether you are a believer or not, is a big thing that it asks you. It is because, like, you can go through it with the mindset of God does exist in the reality of this movie, and, like, does, like, have, like, motivations and whatnot, and is literally talking through her. Or you could look at it like, this is random, and she's a little bit of loony. So those are like the two ways that you can look at it.
See, I see it as somewhere in between. Like, I don't think she's so delusional as to think that uh, it's a minor distinction, but I don't think she's so delusional as to think that God is literally speaking for her. But I think that she thinks that whatever the first thought that pops into her mind is the voice of God. And she's, you don't have the benefit of a novel where where you can't read like the protagonist's inner, monologue or whatever. So I think it's a sort of I'd almost say genius, kind of like she's speaking out loud for the benefit of the audience, so
Mm-hmm.
that it might not be subtle, but it's, a way of conveying like what her inner process is. Um, and so I think that I don't think she's quite so delusional as to think that, what she's saying is the voice of God, but speaking literally like she's possessed, like I don't know, fucking exorcist or something. But but I think she thinks that whatever the first doubt that pops into her mind is the voice of God telling her what she should do. So I mean, like I said, it's a minor distinction, but I don't think she's quite so crazy as to think um,
Mm-hmm.
that what she's saying out loud is literally God possessing her, fucking vocal cords or something. But it's giving the audience a very direct line into like what her inner thought process is. Um, but yeah, I mean, again, it's it's minor, but at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter because yeah, it definitely tells us what she's thinking, and there's a very specific point in the film where you can see her conflating the idea of Jan and God and putting them into one, and it's not even really emphasized, or anything, but it's the key point at which like the movie turns into totally fucked up, you know, and
Yep.
like where she's taking her orders from God, and Jan at the same time. And it's like, well, if you need to prove your love for Jan, then you need to go and do this, and you know,
And
um,
you can definitely tell that that might have been something that, like when they were talking about her being institutionalized for insanity or whatever title they put on it,
mhm.
which they don't really go into super depth of in the movie. So a lot of this is speculation. Like you could definitely imagine that like maybe like her mom walked in on her praying one time and praying like that, which it is very striking to see because like her voice changes and everything. Like it's almost like a Gollum type thing. And uh
Oh
yeah,
yeah. That's a good way of putting it.
and yeah, it's almost similar to Gollum,
Right.
and that kind of like ties into a sort of what's the word, a hypocrisy within the church where they're very aggressively religious, but you could kind of tell that they might think that someone that could actually talk to God is crazy and needs to be institutionalized, and that also ties in with them like not having the bells. So to go more about how strict this religious community is, um it is witnessed where this like the character's never introduced, but there's a dead character and they're having a funeral, and only men are allowed to witness the funerals is a big thing. It's a very sexist church, very old timey. Skarsgård character Jan goes and witnesses the funeral, and he witnesses a very aggressive damnation of the deceased,
Yeah. At the end of the day, they're condemned to hell.
and that is extremely important to know. Is that like he witnesses that, and he's a little more loosely religious. Like I'm not going to say that he's secular or anything, but he's definitely not as fundamentalist as Best. Like his religion is kind of like sex, it seems like.
Yeah. No. As far as Jan, and now see, I'm so fucked up that like I don't even know anymore if this is a really controversial idea. I've heard some more, you know, like kind of intellectual Christians put forth the idea that romantic love is the idea of you know, I mean it's like the junior leagues of an expression for love for God. And I don't know if that's completely blasphemous now or what. This is going back years. So, but you know, you hear the idea of God, you know, creating man in his image, and then so, well, God's a creator then, and so man creates, and that makes
Oh,
sense to me. So, so, but like logically, by extension, then you know, you start talking man loves, then you know, then love might be an expression of God by extension. Von Trier is God. He's the director. God is the director. And that's kind of how I view the meta level of the film, where God's kind of a sick bastard and he's telling the actress what to do. And, you know, so like for, you know, and as long as she goes along with it, then she'll be saved, you know, and so you like, you start to talk, or well, no, go ahead. You were going to say something.
that might be a meta aspect that might be unintentional though.
No. Okay, here's the thing though. If right, because like obviously, if you're not gonna, Von Trier is very meta. Like if you start to talk, the House that Jack built, which I don't know if you've seen that, but
Not that one.
it's no, that's okay. But he starts to compare, and this is where he's going with it, murder with what he's gotten away with. Like the whole statement in the House that Jack's built is like, well, look at like everything I've gotten away with without anybody intervening, you know, without morality ever having said, well, Jesus Christ, you're fucked up, you know. And yeah, so and I kind of see that again here with Breaking the Waves, where it's like I, as the director, have gotten away with all this fucking shit, and you know, but I feel like the linear narrative still works, but I feel like the meta statement is you're here, you are the innocent actress going along with the word of, I know it sounds fucking crazy, but like the word of God, and you know, which gets conflated with Jan, which gets, you know, I think if you look one tier above that is the director. The director is
Okay.
God.
See, that's the third tier that I didn't see. I definitely saw the tiers between the like between God and Jan, and then like probably like back to God.
And I wouldn't do this because it sounds really pretentious and I don't like to do it, but Lars von Trier is a director who does insert himself in his own pictures. The fourth wall breaks. There's one at the very beginning of the film before Bess, you know, before the first chapter. You know, it's, so I guess you could call it prologue, even though he doesn't do like cold open, whatever. Where Bess looks at the camera directly, you know, where the old guy with the beard who breaks the glass in his hand, you know, he talks about, you know, he says, "Okay, woman, leave the room now," you know, and she leaves and she's sitting outside the church, and she looks directly at the camera, and she says, and in that way, I feel like she's looking upon the face of Jan, which an extension is God, which an extension is Von Trier, which is very narcissistic, obviously, but that's how I see it.
And
so,
that's kind of who Lars
one,
von Trier is. He's a very narcissistic person.
He's been accused of being very narcissistic, and that's kind of how I view it. I don't feel any of this is necessary to viewing the film, you know, as it is. I feel like that's the first, like the film has to work on a linear, like narrative level, like where you fuck the narrative, fuck the meta, you know, but then I think you can work your way up. So that, like, for me, that's the first thing where she looks directly at the camera. And then there's only one other instance of that, but that's when Jan comes home for the first time, and it's shot kind of like home video, where it's the only other time where she looks directly at the camera, you know, and it's the only time in the film where music plays. which it's kind of like a montage, like Rambo or Rocky or something. Von Trier doesn't use music throughout the rest of the picture, and like the chapters I feel frame the film in the same way that music does, which is they're sort of establishing shots. They're very beautiful and very painterly, and they're static, whereas the rest of the picture is shot in his signature style, which is shaky cam. It's very documentary. And in the same way, music isn't used throughout any scene because I feel like music, he doesn't want to define a scene by the soundtrack used, in that scene. Like, I feel like he wants it to be kind of independent of music. But when you think back on the film and what it entails on the whole, the soundtrack of like Jethro Tull and Dylan and Leonard Cohen and Elton John and and Bowie, obviously, at the very end, is what defines, your kind of soundtrack of the film. So he's not limiting any given scene to the music used, the same as he's not limiting any given scene to kind of the camera angle used. He is, but you can sense his frustration with that. Like it's like if God were to decide like that life is like Netflix and there's just too many options and I want to limit my viewpoint to two-dimensional, like what dimension would I choose? Because like I think I don't know if it was Dancer in the Dark onward or whatever, but for a period he used AI learning programs to like just predetermine what shot he was going to use, for a picture, because he's like, he drove himself mad, I think, which I kind of understand. Like, oh, you're like, what is the perfect angle? What is the perfect angle? Because like a camera is artificial, right? Like if you think about the way you view life, it's through a camera. That is a two-dimensional object in space and time picking a perspective. And I think he drove himself insane with that idea. And then he ultimately was like, well, fuck it. I'm going to let an AI do this for me. I think 2000 onward for a little while. And so it's basically like, I try to think of it like if God were like, what's the perfect angle to view the human race from? This is kind of what he would choose. So would you say this has a pretty rocking soundtrack?
Oh, the soundtrack is great. I love the chapter art.
I do too, and I feel like in what I'm trying to say,
this is one of the chapter arts.
It's beautiful. And what I'm trying to say, and I know it's indecipherable almost, but in the same way that he frames the picture, like, okay, well, maybe I'm wrong. Like when you think about the movie as a whole, do you go back to those chapter breaks? Like the first thought is the chapter breaks? Because I do.
I think of the chapter breaks a lot, yeah.
Right. And so what I'm trying to say is that the music is used in the same way. Those chapter breaks are establishing shots, and I feel like they don't define the picture because they're static, and you see he uses the documentary hand style a lot. And in the same way he uses, I think, music, so that the only scene in which music plays over an actual event is when Jan comes home for the first time. And so as incomprehensible as I might be, that's really where I'm coming from, where I think like, the director has got, and that's the idea. So
it's not incomprehensible.
Okay.
I got you.
Okay. So like, I don't want to ruin the movie though, because I feel like it's very important to view it for the first time as a straightforward narrative, because if that doesn't work, then the audience is going to fucking leave,
Correct. Yeah.
So
and it works as just a pure narrative. So after the Life Alone chapter, in which she's praying a lot, the establishing point in the film is when Jan gets injured on the oil rig, and it happens.
Yeah, which is, for the record, though, this is what I felt like was important to incorporate. Is that's pretty far into the film,
That's true. It is a fairly long first act.
So it takes a long time to kind of figure out like what the film's going to be about. Like I mean, at first I try to, I obviously know because you told me, but like I was trying to think about like where I might think the film is going. Like she's wide-eyed and kind of crazy. Is this a film about somebody who might murder their husband or something like that, you know. And like it's about 45 minutes in that the picture finally becomes about what it's about, uh, you know. So that was kind of the thing that I felt was most important, is the kind of you know, like you remember at the very start of the picture, and something I kind of lost till I rewatched it, but was, you know, like what have the outsiders brought to us that was truly of value? And you know, she says the music, you know, and you have the like this soundtrack that, like I said, you know, it's Jethro Tull, and it's Dylan, and it's Leonard Cohen, and Bowie, and Elton John, and you know, and but none of those are very distinctly Danish. But I think the idea, though, because I was really struggling with this, is like, well, how important is the cultural backdrop of this? Like, is that important to the film and understanding it? It's like, well, no, it's just everybody's an outsider if you're not part of this little village, you know.
True.
Right. So I think that's, yeah, like I'd say it's very important to the audience, if they're struggling with that idea at all, to be like, no, just everybody's an outsider.
But yep, this is like really like the teetering point in the film. He gets injured, and like he gets injured by actually first protecting and like
Yeah.
saving one of his like
Right.
the fun loving guy.
And
Um
you notice that pretty soon. I had to watch like the movie 3 times to realize, oh yeah, that's one of the two dudes who shows up later on in the picture, you know, to show their support, you know.
yeah, you
I
definitely
think,
see that something's going to go wrong, because but you just don't know
right.
who it's going to happen to, because originally in the scene the oil well breaks or whatever. I'm not an oil master, so I
It's kind
don't
of like
know.
There Will Be Blood. Like I remember when I watched that film for the first time, I knew something bad was going to happen. There's just too many mechanical elements to it to think that it was all going to be fine. Even for somebody who has no idea, like there's a sense of dread in that scene. Like, you know, and you think it's over maybe when the friend gets hit, and you're like, oh, that was it. And then the surprise is that, well, Skarsgård's character,
Yeah,
I
the
can't say for sure because I kind of knew that was going to happen, Skarsgård. But for somebody watching a picture for the first time, I don't know. You know,
yep,
uh,
the friend gets knocked down. He uh like is unconscious for a few seconds there. Skarsgård is
and he
trying.
smiles like it's all okay.
Yeah,
You know,
Jan is waking up, and then he smiles and like, all right, everything's okay. And then Jan just stands up, and a piece of rigging is still spinning around and clocks him on the back of the head, like on the back
right?
and the side of the
Or
head.
yeah, yeah,
And basically like that screws up his neck, that screws up his head. Like we learn very quickly that he's paralyzed, or that at least temporarily, and he may never be able to walk again. The news dropping to Emily Watson, she just faints. Like Bess can't even like really digest what's going on. Like before this, she had prayed again. She had prayed to God for him to send Jan home. That's when you think, hey, she might have some like powers here.
I think that's the subversion in the film, is like you totally expect that she's insane, and then towards the end, it almost, well, I mean, that's the first instance where it almost seems like, yeah, like okay, but I think the audience would go, okay, well, that's coincidence. But then as the film goes on, I think it becomes increasingly unlikely, you know, that like he seems to recover as she goes along with, you know, his
Yeah, so
well, whatever,
we'll
a
just get
little later.
we'll just get right into it. At that point, you know, it's not looking good that like he might not even live, let alone walk again. He goes through multiple surgeries. It's not looking good for him. And then at some point they're talking, because he's actually able to be slightly conscious at this point. He asks her to have sex with other men, and the way Jan explains it to her is that I want to see the look on your face that we had after like the first time having sex, and that would give me the will to live. So then she immediately has this religious and moral question to answer.
Okay, so when Jan first comes home, the one major thing there is, I mean, he tries to kill himself. He can barely move, but I mean, he's mostly paralyzed, but he tries to take the pills or whatever, so I think at that point we're supposed to kind of think as the audience that, well, life in this state isn't worth living. That when what he's really trying to do is he doesn't want to live, but he wants her to live. And I think we're supposed to take that at face value, that life in this state isn't really worth living at all. But we know so little about Jan early on in the picture, and beyond that, it's hard to say for sure. I mean, the friend obviously expresses, or the sister, whatever, expresses her doubts. It's kind of ironic that the outsider is doubting the outsider. And so that was a key thing for me, is like really not knowing what Jan really wants out of it. But as the film goes on, we realize that his brain his skull is filling with fluid, and it's compromising his ability to really rationalize. So basically, as he becomes sicker and sicker, he becomes sicker and sicker in his delusions or desires for her to go and screw other men and tell him about it and whatever. So you can see where she took God the Father and then mixed that with Jan, and then it became this fucked up amalgamation of righteousness.
When I had first had this film like spoiled to me, like I thought, oh, it's kind of sweet because like he's never gonna be able to walk or move again, so he wants her to be happy.
He wants what's best.
He wants her to have experiences with other people and move on, which might still be there, but I don't think it is. Like it's.
Oh, you don't?
Well, okay. It could be. Like,
no, that's totally interesting to me, because I didn't know if I was being too cynical. So I know that I think that's an interesting aspect to explore, because I think the average person would take it at face value, and I didn't know if I was.
I didn't. Like that's the note I have here. Is it for Jan or is it for Bess? Is the thing,
right? Like, and that becomes for me like the big contest in the whole picture. Is like I don't know, but but I'd love to hear what you think about it, because like I really,
because
the ending is sort of sentimental, but then considering everything that came fucking before it, it's like I don't know.
You immediately have the question like, okay, is this dude a little bit sick? The big question is like, who is it for? Is it for Bess or is it for Jan? And like the first time I watched it, I was like, okay, this is kind of for Jan. And then the second time, I thought it was a little more maybe for Bess, and like maybe he's like, I'm okay with people thinking I'm sick as long as Bess can go on living without me.
That's interesting. So at what point in the picture did you kind of feel that way? Like, I mean, I think, because
as the picture goes on, I feel that way less and less, just because of how like destructive it gets, but also his brain becomes more and more compromised.
Right. Yeah. But it's interesting that you thought more that way as upon later viewings than on the initial one. Like,
I think most people would think
more cynical.
Yeah, I think most people would be like more positive initially, but I was kind of like negative towards it at the beginning. And then the next chapter is doubt, and that's when.
And that's where I feel like the whole movie is defined, is that doubt, because I don't fucking know.
Yeah, because I mean, she's going through a lot of the same doubt that we are right now. Like one of the first things she does is she comes on to the doctor because she figures, okay, this guy's trusting or whatever.
Yeah, I thought that guy was going to lose his job initially, like my first viewing.
The doctor was like professional though, and was like, put your clothes back on, like blah blah blah, stuff
Right.
like that.
But then the Elton John song that was playing like kind of telegraphs later on that he's actually in love with her, because it's like I can't stand to see you with another man or something like that. And so it's really a subtle thing, but yeah,
Oh,
later on
I
it,
didn't even
he
notice that.
confesses his love. Huh?
I didn't even notice that.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I
Oh,
didn't.
yeah, no, well, again, that's the benefit of having seen it like 3 consecutive times. So, um, yeah, so don't feel bad about that. But I just have no life. So, but
You're good, man. And then like the next experience she has is kind of a weird one because Jan tells her, and his voice is so different from any other time. He tells her, "I'm at the back of the bus," and his voice is like ghostly, like more so
just,
than at any point in the like it's similar to her voice when she's talking through God when she prays. So like that's
is that the way you see it? Like she's not talking through God, she's talking through Jan. Like,
or she's not talking to Jan, she's talking to God maybe. And that's
oh, okay,
I think that's the way I think that's what helped her like become okay with it.
right.
Um
Yeah, that's the way I say.
and then,
I don't know if I'm giving. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Sorry.
yeah, and then she basically goes to the back of the bus and uh satisfies a man. um a stranger. um and then like immediately like feels disgust about it, but
Yeah,
like she
I
literally
thought
gets
she was gonna puke, and then she
she
did.
gets
Yeah.
off the bus and pukes, and then all of a sudden when she's done puking she has a grin on her face. So like that's the ultimate like
I,
dichotomy in this movie, where it's like, are they doing a good thing, are they doing a bad thing?
I, and
Like,
that's yeah.
and it really just plays along with you the whole time. So I don't think there are good answers, and that's the point.
Well, thank you, because yeah, I'm like I really was trying to figure that one out. I'm like, what is it? The most blasphemous fucking movie ever made, or is it just positing that I don't have a clear answer. It's like I don't know if this is a film made by somebody who's so absolutely frustrated with the idea of God that they they don't know, or if it's a straight up smear piece where it's like that God is a dirty bastard who just wants us to do whatever the fuck this he wants us to do and for his own amusement, and then we'll be accepted into heaven. And it's like that's the third tier stuff that I really don't know about. I mean, I think reading the HBO Max description really helped me as far as like she takes on a sort of martyrdom. It's like sort of a Jesus Christ
Yeah, there's a lot of Jesus
sort of.
imagery in her actions where like
But
we
it doesn't.
eventually get to
Again,
a
it's like
sacrifice.
right. I know that skips ahead, but it's like it doesn't totally fit because again, with Christ, it's like before it's like his penultimate words that God, why have you forsaken me? And then but his last words are it is accomplished. And with that, you don't get that with this film. It's maybe I got it all wrong, and then her last words are it's all wrong, and so she dies. I think she graduates to adulthood in her last moments where it's like she dies alone, confused, and scared and in pain. It's like that's so a very
All right.
childish character.
Let's
You know,
turn our way over to that.
oh,
So
sorry.
the next chapter is faith, and if I recall, that's the chapter where it like you start to kind of see results, where like she like goes to the bar, like dresses as a prostitute, has sex, and
That
like
was the
it
big thing. I didn't even know
and
if it would work at first because she's so inexperienced. I was like, how the fuck is she gonna pass herself off as a prostitute? Like,
yeah. Well, anyway,
but it does ultimately
yeah,
work
and
out.
like like you start actually seeing like parallels with, oh, Jan's getting better as she
Right.
does. So like that's the thing where like you're also like, all right, does she have these powers? Is she like some sort of like a vessel for God or
And-
whatever. And then like one of the next things that you see is, well, you see the sister start getting really confused or really concerned because it's like she's going all like, because basically this is not Bess's behavior, and like, you know, they're thinking about like throwing her back into the institutions. And they actually I think it actually does happen in the faith chapter when Jan signs over the rights for her to be like institutionalized again, or that
which is the
might
thing
be.
to me that signals that he knows he's fucked up.
Well,
Right?
yeah, that's the thing. Is like like I think at that point in the
It
movie we
cast
kind of
doubt,
learn
even though this
we
is the faith chapter.
at that point in the movie we kind of learn like, you know, does he have faith in his own mind anymore? Because like he writes down the notes like there's evil in my head and like blah blah blah. Like
Yeah, no, yeah, that was what disturbed me.
an important thing to know too is at that point in the movie, like I believe just the end of the faith chapter, she goes on this boat. Like she asks like this tugboat guy or whatever, hey, can you take me to one of the ships? Because she, you know, wants to, you know, pose as a
We
prostitute or whatever.
skipped
To
over a big thing there
okay,
where,
well, I was talking about the first meeting on that ship
okay, all right,
because the first meeting ended differently.
right.
Um,
Barely, but yeah.
yeah. So the first meeting, like, he was like, no one goes to the ship because like we basically learned that like they're crazy,
The girls won't
basically.
go to that ship.
Yeah, they're basically pirate types, like, because like she was like, can you take me to one of the ships? And then
And that guy's, what's his name? It's Uno something. He's like Peter Stormare, where like I've never seen that guy play somebody who isn't a sleazebag. Because the guy who took her to the ship says, the other girls won't go there, and she's like, well, no harm, no foul, and right, and so he takes her there, but he says, I'll wait for you. And
yeah,
yeah, and so you enter that room, and there's a table, laid with it looks like drugs, money, whatever. But the one thing that stands out is obviously, like you said, the pistol. And she asks like, what do you want? And he's like, I want what you would have, I don't know how to do a fucking German accent, but yeah, I want to have you watch you have sex with the sailor, and I watch. And at first the sailor's obviously reciprocant or whatever. She goes along with it, but as soon as she starts to back out of it, like, I want to go home, then Uno, whatever the fuck his name is, he's like Peter Stormare, he plays the sleaze bag, cuts her
you're
dress from
dragging Peter
behind.
Stormare into
Yeah.
this.
Yeah, no, I love that dude, but I love his commitment to playing a sleaze bag. It's like 8mm and Minority Report. Like, that's his role. Is just be like, I love the sickest shit. It's like, I mean, that's just him. So but yeah, no, Uno, whatever the fuck his name is, that's the same thing. Like, that's his demographic, is playing a total sleaze bag. And he does again in this scene. So the disturbing thing is that she returns to that situation, thinking that she failed God's test.
Yep, and that's where we
So
get into Bess's sacrifice. And before we get to that part where she
is
returns,
that the chapter?
this is
Yeah.
when, to me, it becomes like the most biblical, like Bess's sacrifices, because like in the Bible, like Jesus like has to like hold the cross and carry it, and like he's getting whipped. People are throwing like garbage at him. People are spitting on his face, all that stuff, and like you kind of see that the parallels there because she comes back from the sailors the first time, so it's like the same day, I believe, actually, within like the same 48 hours. And
Yeah,
because
it seems very
she doesn't change
Christmas.
her clothes, she's still beaten up, and like it's rough. And so basically she like walks her bike over to first like try to like get shelter from her mother, who has now like abandoned her, which is
Right.
for me probably the most heartbreaking scene in the movie, because
Mhm.
like you can tell that the mother, like what we were talking about like earlier, is how she's been institutionalized in the past. Like she's probably put up with a lot of stuff and been but still loves her so much that always put up to it to that point. But then like she's knocking on the door and the mother is just there stone cold, like not letting her in, and it's heartbreaking. In between that is like just so like visceral, like such a visceral scene where you see her like walking her bike around and these like little shithead kids. But like, and in that case, like the bicycle really like kind of is almost like the Jesus cross, you know? And
Oh, that's interesting.
like,
Yeah.
like,
Right.
and they go all the way to the church where she collapses in exhaustion because like
Right.
she's still very beaten up and just emotionally distressed and physically, exhausted. And then like the priest comes over and it's like,
He doesn't stop it, but he goes
right,
off
well,
to
he
right.
stops the kids, like he's like, run along, demons, to the
He
kids
goes
basically.
right.
um like, but he doesn't help her, he abandons her too. So her mother abandoned her god abandoned her, or her, I shouldn't say her god, her priest abandoned her specifically. And
That was
then,
as interesting. More
and right before that, we had learned that Jan had signed a letter to have her institutionalized. So even Jan had abandoned her at that point.
but that was what ultimately turned my mind was like, I mean, as fucked up as he was like, I'm bad for her. There's this point in the picture where I feel like it's like a wink, to the audience where it's like, I'm sick of the hat. I feel like that's where it's like it's Von Trier himself said, I'm
Talking through
fucked
the
up.
character,
Right.
I can definitely see that he does have vessels like that in a lot of his movies.
And then he takes that to its pathological fucking limit with that last third of the film, where it's like every worst goddamn possible outcome that could, possibly happen, comes to fruition. Where it's like this almost wink to the audience, where it's like bail out now. Just fuck off right now, because it's a sprint to the finish line, which is I am fucked up. Because I think a lot of people enter a movie with the expectation that it can go wherever the fuck they want it to go, but that last third, it's like nobody showed up for that. Nobody showed up for the worst absolute goddamn fucking outcome.
Yeah.
And,
And then approaching the climax of the film, she's there still at the church, just outside the church. Priest left, the
right.
kids left, like, but her sister came over and is
Yeah, he
like,
calls upon her. Yeah.
yeah, and like she comes there to help her. Like her sister's still there for her, who at
Right.
that point is the only one that's still there. And she asks, Bess asks how Jan's doing basically, and to see like if basically like her going to the sailors like helped anything. And then she's like, Jan's probably gonna die, or Jan's
Oh,
dying.
you right. And yeah,
So
yeah, where she takes that
her,
as like a failure on her part.
yeah, it take
Right.
and like she gets a grin and she's like, oh no, like everything's still in play here. Like
Yeah.
I can still write this. And the audience at this point just thinks Jan is dead. Jan's gonna die. And like, it seems inevitable. And
Yeah, he's resigned himself to his fate. And so you're kind of on his side almost.
yeah, but she's like, I know what I have to do. And that's what she tells her
Right.
sister. And that, cut forward, we see like for me the best scene of like the movie is just her on like the tugboat again, going back onto the ship, and just her face,
Yeah, and he's
and she
like, "Are you
begins to
sure?"
pray to God again, and God had not answered her for a couple of
And he
prayers
still
back.
does. Don't you
Eh,
think that? Yeah, you're right. You know, there
Like,
are other people who
yes,
want my
Bess.
attention. Yeah,
Like, like it's heartwarming and brutal at the same time, because
right.
like she knows she's going to go back to that ship with the crazy people and die. Like,
You even see their look on their face, like, "What the fuck are you thinking?"
yeah, like,
You know?
and yeah, and then they drop her back off on the ship, and then we don't actually see what happens. Like, that's like the
Right.
one mercy. That's probably like the one mercy that Lars von Trier gives the audience the entire movie. Um,
Well, but that's where I'd argue. Like, I feel like actually, although it's so intensive, I feel like this is almost as well. It's well, I that's not fair. I haven't watched a lot of his other movies in a long time, but I feel like it's almost his most merciful film because, like, he knows he's being a fucking bastard. And when I think of and you can cut all this out, that's fine. But Dancer in the Dark, that is a bastard of a fucking movie. I mean, it is the most motherfucking deliberately goddamn bastard fucking movie. It's like top 3, 5 easily, and it's like he knows, and he's trying to spare you because Dancer in the Dark doesn't. And that obviously, I mean, that came out after. That's in 2000. This is like 4 years after. But to my mind, he's like, how do I fucking top the bastard bullshit I pulled with Breaking the Waves? And with Dancer in the Dark, he does it. It's like the ultimate anti musical, but yeah, no, he's being a fucker, and I think he knows it. I think he spares the audience, because I think my patience wear thin. I think this is where a lot of other people would ultimately fall in, and
uh,
but at the same time, like for anybody who ultimately wants to watch, I would say a good picture. Like yeah, it's about the first third. It's explicit, but it does move beyond that. You
yeah.
know,
Um,
so.
yeah, the subject matter is really, really heavy, but it's probably honestly like one of his more tame films. Um, which
Yeah.
is honestly true. Um,
I
uh,
don't
well,
fuck that.
Melancholia might be his tamest, and the world ends. Um,
And I've known people who are like, this looks like the weirdest shit I've ever fucking seen in my life. Like just watching trailers for it. So I wish there were a way of persuading people, where it's like, it's not as fucked up as you think, but I mean, it is, but it's not. I don't know. Maybe you can put that to words. I
I'd
can't.
say this movie might actually have the most heart, but um um we don't actually see her get harmed and like basically cut up again.
Which was merciful, yeah.
Yep. Um, but like we basically cut to seeing her get wheeled in like in the hospital, the same hospital that Jan's in, and her sister's there
Right.
performing like the nurse duties, and the doctor's there trying to do his best, but she's bleeding out or something. The
Right.
actual injuries are not super well described, but
Clearly,
it's
yeah,
it's
right. Yeah.
implied. Um, and like basically, and then she passes, and then like new chapter begins. That last chapter was Bess's sacrifice. This chapter is
That's a fitting title. Yeah.
this chapter is funeral, and the beginning it ties back to the beginning of the movie where we saw that first funeral where they damned like basically a prostitute to hell, and like in the middle of the ceremony we see, oh shit, Jan's alive and Jan can walk.
Yeah. And he
like
can walk, which
barely.
is what she prayed for all that time. Yeah.
And then you're like, oh, so her power is still, so the like faith in God like paid off like in a
Which is,
weird way.
I mean, what the doctor character basically mockingly says, like, "Oh, what powers you possess," um,
Yeah.
earlier on in the picture, Yeah,
And
it
then
only
in that scene too, because like uh
she's there.
he's like
Yeah,
listing off like the medical report or whatever, and he had written down a bunch of stuff that it was like blah blah blah, like debauchery, blah 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 blah, like
yeah, psychosis and neurosis. Yeah,
yeah. And then like and then at the end, like he was like, I'd like just like her cause of death just to go down as
she's good,
being a good person,
right?
because like
And that's where the
as
whole
lost
movie
as
snapped for me.
she was always a good person. And I think as lost as Jan was, like I still think like he was a good person too.
Jan, you think?
Yeah, as lost as he was, I think so. Because like Jan in the first half of the movie, like he's sympathetic, and like we see like maybe like his penance. His penance is, I have to save her from being damned to hell by the priests, which is what he saw earlier in the movie.
Yeah, no, that's the
So
thing for me is you have to think of, I'm sorry, what antisocial, I mean, like try to think, like what antisocial behavior that is to steal a corpse away to give her a proper burial. Like that to me was the confirmation moment where like he
it,
really did
I think it's
actually value her.
anti-societal. I don't know if it's antisocial.
Well,
Does that make
yeah,
sense? Is that like splitting
no,
hairs?
I
But
understand the distinction. Yeah, but I mean, the penalty isn't obviously going to be as great with this very isolated, zealotous, village, but it's still a very risky behavior, right? And he's
mhm.
taking that lead on her behalf,
Yep,
right?
and that's like a kind of penance, because like
Right.
he basically goes into the morgue. They like steal her corpse. They replace the the stuff, like the coffin, with sandbags. He gets his oil rig buddies to help him. So they smuggle her corpse out to sea, uh, and they give her like basically like a sailor's burial, where
Really?
they like dump her over the side,
Yeah.
and she's lost, or her body just goes to the sea. And then like the biggest twist for me happens in the movie at this point, because like this is when it ends optimistically. um
Which I remember you saying. I never.
yeah, like this is why Strangely is the most optimistic Lars von Trier movie I've ever seen. um,
Which is fucked up.
um,
But no, I'm eager to hear it. I'm like, this is.
like,
I don't
and
know what to make of that ending.
he gets woken up by the beard dude. um so that guy wakes him up and is like, I have to show you something. They go to a sonar and see that no one is
Right.
within like
And
a
he's like, I
hundred.
just want to make sure. Yeah.
Yep, no one's
Yeah.
within like 100 miles of them. And then they walk out onto the deck, and they hear bells ringing everywhere.
And then you see
And
the poorly CGI 1996 bells. Yeah.
yeah, like through up in the clouds. And it's just like, in a way, like the most like compare, like when drugged through the mud of like the entire movie to that point of like gloom and doom. Like it's like the most heartwarming ending that you could possibly have, where it's like, like you bring hope and mercy back to like life for Jan and for Emily, because like the mercy that you see there is, oh, Bess went to heaven, and the mercy that you see also is that Bess forgave Jan, or maybe there was nothing to forgive in the first place. Oddly merciful for what the movie would have you believe the ending would be. it's almost like the like Jesus has risen portion of like the
But
Bible.
the one aspect that's missing. I only say this because I've watched The Last Temptation of Christ, which I know people fucking hate. I love that movie. It's
A lot of
absolutely
people
one of
like
my
it.
favorites. But is like right before he says, it is accomplished. He says, God, oh God, why have you forsaken me? And like in this movie, it feels like he's like ending on that note. You never get the it is accomplished. You get the
So,
you
so
get
how much of reality do you think was in like the Bell scene? Like, do you think that?
that's what I wish you would fill in. Because to
Okay,
me, I'm like, I don't fucking know. Like with Von Trier, I'm like, he
you still don't trust
shoots
it.
in a hyper, huh?
You still don't trust it because
I
it's
don't know what to make of it. I really don't. But I know that dealing with Lars Von Trier, he interjects himself into his own pictures
at that
in a way
point. Did he
that's
intentionally though? Would you say? Or
this
at
is
least
so early on.
as a viewer in 1996, would you expect, like, what would you think?
This is fucked up. And any person that enters into it not knowing what to expect, I watched it sobbing and laughing simultaneously. I was like, you bastard, like that was the feeling that I felt. I'm like, you got me, but fuck you, and most people aren't going to feel that going into it. So
So
whatever
the
around
ending
it.
of Breaking the Waves was not, I suppose, happy enough to vindicate like the sins of like the characters throughout the movie to
Right.
you. Okay.
But that was what was so bizarre to me is when I really stopped to think about it. I feel like this was him railing against God, seeing that as to me, it's his first film that really attempted to do that. I mean, maybe previous ones did, but
I think it was, but like it's still, I don't know, it still had an appreciation for mercy throughout. I
and you
think he
think
wanted to
that's the
tell,
takeaway of the film.
yeah, well, I think he wanted to tell a Lars von Trier Jesus movie. Like it's available on Criterion Collection. If you're interested in it, uh go see Breaking the Waves. It's probably Lars von Trier's most optimistic picture. I'd argue, because
It's a
like
fucked up thought,
maybe
but
the
yeah,
most watchable picture is Melancholia, but the world ends.
yeah.
You know what I mean? Like so
Actually, you're probably right about that. Yeah, yeah, right.
um
Yeah.
so what would you give this in a star rating? 1 through 5.
Oh fuck. It's fucked up, and I've run into this problem. I don't know if you've watched anything on YouTube, but people like, I don't know what the fuck to give it. 4 to 4.5.
There you go. That's pretty good. I'd probably give
Okay.
it, you know, it's probably to this point my favorite Lars von Trier movie, because
Really?
I think so. I don't like
Okay.
Antichrist as much as a lot of people. It just doesn't do it for me as much.
Oh,
Um,
you're the
but
Antichrist. Then.
I'll probably give him a. Hmm, I'll give it a 4 star. 4 stars. I'm kind of with you, 4 to 4.5, but probably leaning towards. Well, okay, I'll give him 4.5 stars for this.
Okay. No,
Uh
yeah, that's in the realm. Yeah.
yeah. So it's because it's like, you know, I like, for if you're a very successful, at least in certain ways, director, like your best, like lots of their like best movies, I think are gonna like achieve into like the 4 star rate range. Then for me, so the final verdict for Breaking the Waves, I'm
Four.
giving it 4.5 stars for me. Dakota, what are you giving it?
4.
4.
I have to
All
do
right.
4.
Well, there you have it. It's available on Criterion Collection right now. Criterion, sponsor us, maybe, please. Please, pretty please. Have a good one, everybody.